Josh Dorfman, what inspires you?
Innovative climate solutions
Very
inspire
nice.
me. Solutions that cut carbon, but also improve our quality of life at the same time. And in a business context, also either save us money or make us money. That
So how did you
inspires me.
get into that focus where that became so important to you and it's become your work?
It's certainly been a journey. In the 1990s, so going back a ways, I had a very different view of what my life was going to be. I had moved to China about a year after college. I had gone over to teach English in the university, was thinking about a career in maybe State Department, maybe CIA. I just was a young kid thinking like, man, if I go to the other side of the planet and like live, thrive, and survive, cool stuff's going to happen. And cool stuff did happen. It just was very different. I ended up getting a job in a factory making bicycle locks for a company called Kryptonite. I don't know if you ever had a Kryptonite bike lock, but they invented like this U-shaped lock. You know, they now are ubiquitous that you see for bikes. So that was Kryptonite. And I went to work for them full time. We opened a bunch of factories. I was thinking, gosh, we might even sell locks here. There's 1 billion people. It's a developing country. Everyone's riding bikes. Like this was before BYD and all the EVs we now see coming out of China, 3 decades later. Everybody had a bicycle. And we opened our 3rd factory in southern China. I was traveling with a Chinese entrepreneur who we were partnering with. It was his factory. We got to this restaurant, and before we went in, we were going to celebrate and consummate the deal. He said to me, Josh, look, my Mercedes is the biggest Mercedes in this parking lot. And I thought, yeah, it's 1997. This is communist China. And look at all these Mercedes in the parking lot. This was Hong Kong money spilling into southern China. But what I realized in that moment, I was like, right. Nobody here wants a bike. Everybody wants a car. And what have I seen in the last year and a half? I've seen tunnels, bridges, highways being built at record pace as this country develops. What does it mean when there's 1 billion cars in China and then you extend that to India, Russia, everywhere else that's developing, Eastern Europe? What does that mean for the future of our planet, natural resources? It wasn't immediately like, oh my God, I got to do something about climate, but it was the beginning of a journey that eventually led me to think like, hey, all these countries want to improve their standard of living, raise quality of life for their citizens, and as they should and as we should in America. How do we do that in ways that enable us to pursue our best lives, but do it in a way that's aligned with with nature and nature's ecosystems and ability to support
Thanks for sharing. So looking over your website and some of the appearances you made, it's quite impressive, actually. You've done a column in Fast Company. You've been on multiple shows, whether that's radio or television. How did that all come to fruition?
Well, what I eventually came back to the States and decided to do in the early 2000s was, it took me a while to process everything I'd seen in China, and I went and got an MBA, went through the .com bubble, burst, all that stuff. But eventually by 2004, I thought, you know what? I get how I'm going to try and make an impact based on what I'd seen in China. I'm going to try and help Americans in our consumer economy consume more sustainably. That's my goal in life. This is how I can have impact, kind of not trying to overthrow a system, but affect change within a system, our capitalist system, and our way of life. And so I started a modern design, what became a modern design, sustainable furnishings and furniture company. Eventually moved that company to Brooklyn, opened a showroom. My showroom was actually also doubled as my apartment. So I actually lived in my store basically for 4 years. And at the same time as I was doing that, my first employee in the business basically called me out for being a giant hypocrite. She was like, yeah, you're selling all this green stuff to consumers, but we're working out of your home, and like you're always in the shower, you barely recycle, like you're a terrible environmentalist. This doesn't make any sense, like you're a giant hypocrite. She kind of said this on her last day walking out the door. And so I owned it. I wrote this blog entry. This goes back a couple of decades, and I called it the Lazy Environmentalist. And I was like, look, I'm just going to like speak my truth here. I know I'm not proud of it. I take long showers. I am an environmentalist, but I really enjoy long showers. I do my best thinking in the shower. I know I'm using a lot of water. I know I'm using a lot of energy to heat that water. I could really use a fantastic low flow shower head with awesome water pressure. Like, I would buy that if the water pressure was right. If the spray was good, and I would buy it. I'd like an Audi TT convertible if I can afford it, and there happens to be an electric option or biodiesel or hydrogen. I don't care about the technology, but if it's more sustainable or eco-friendly and fits what I want, I will do that. But I'm not going to go out of my way. As much as I care about saving the planet, I'm not going to change my behavior. I'm not going to be inconvenienced in any way to kind of live my values. I know that's kind of crappy, but I actually feel like there's probably millions of people who feel how I do. We care. We're a little bit lazy. We're lazy environmentalists. And that struck a nerve. And that came out right before Al Gore's movie An Inconvenient Truth in 2006. And so the timing was really awesome, because here I was as a guy who was understood all of like the cutting edge green products, the best design stuff. I knew all the designers. One thing led to another. The Lazy Environmentalist became a little radio show kind of on the internet. And then I was in New York, so I got tested on Sirius Satellite Radio. They picked it up, and then it went live. And then it was sort of off to the races with this dialogue, kind of like I'm describing to you, Graham, of just trying to find the best options out there that elevate our lives and bring them into balance with nature at the same time.
I'd like to understand how that has translated into Supercool. Like, how do you function as a business, and like, what does that mean for what that looks like on a regular basis?
So yeah, to carry that forward, the Lazy Environmentalist then became this. It kind of took on a life of its own. It was amazing. It became a reality TV show on Sundance Channel. I went, and you ask how did I happen to write for Fast Company or Esquire or whomever. It was the right moment it was the right conversation for the right moment. That probably still could be the right conversation. I think we basically all are lazy environmentalists. But for me, my evolution as a professional and just thinking about trying to drive effective, positive change, I started to feel that what was happening around sustainable consumption, green products, like there's a market there. I don't think it's grown actually very much. I think it's pretty much steady state. I don't think that like what I was hoping might happen around the consumer revolution, it just hasn't happened, right? It's and so I started to think that the lever to drive more positive impact is really more in this kind of business to business realm. Companies that are, very often companies that are venture backed, they don't have to be, but go out, raise significant venture capital, come up with some climate technology, and then go through the process of doing their early seed rounds, their Series A, their Series B. And when I started looking in a couple of years ago at how many climate technology companies had raised growth stage funding rounds, Series B or beyond, over the past decade or so, it was close to 2,000. And so you can't really raise Series B funding unless you're either commercialized and in market with your solution, or you're very, very close. Now, a lot of those companies failed, but hundreds have succeeded, which means there are all these solutions in market today that will do things like, use AI to cut the heating and cooling in giant buildings, right? Which is the biggest expense on operationally on electricity for buildings, is heating and cooling, or your HVAC. And it'll cut it automatically, which means you're going to cut your emissions, which means you're going to save money. And you just see these delightful, wonderful solutions rolling out for everything from like hotels to high-rise apartment buildings to massive office buildings, hospitals. And, it's just one example of hundreds of ways to drive real massive change. I got very excited about that. And I feel like the market, those stories aren't really being told. Once you get to like commercial scale, it's almost like the media, there's no interest. Like there's media interest early on. There's media interest in like, oh, this thing in a lab made from algae could like one day turn into a building. And everyone's like, whoa, a zillion likes, but it's like not real. And, or so-and-so company just raised $1 billion for fusion technology that might exist in the year 2040. And it's like, why? Great. Okay. How does that help me today? It doesn't help anybody. And so, but that's what we tend to cover from the media side on the positive side, right? On the negative side is just what the mainstream media does all day long anyways. Like it's either, climate change is either too much, right? Or there's like devastation, or, Trump calls it a hoax. And so we're going to cover the hoax. Is it a hoax? It's not a hoax. And like, you just lose sight of actually like all the solutions that are scaling up. No one covers it. And I felt like what's really interesting, if you look at the United Nations and the United Nations, I forget the exact department, but let's call it their communications department, studies they've done with different universities and academics, everybody knows if you actually want people to pay attention to the conversation around climate change, you have to talk about solutions, real solutions. Nobody does it. And so that's the gap that Supercool steps into as a media company. And then we're, probably doing similar things to you, but, our podcast, newsletters, we've launched a course, taking our learnings after talking to all of these really amazing companies. We're like, okay, how do you actually get the market to adopt your solution? How do you position it? How do you frame your value proposition? Because it's not always very straightforward when you're trying to commercialize some of these esoteric technologies. I only talk to companies that are succeeding because I want to know how are you succeeding? What are you doing differently? Then we distill that. And we really try and share those learnings in different forms, and then, build a revenue model around that.
Could you share a specific story on one that kind of pops out as, what speaks to what Supercool does, what kind of impact it's made?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say a couple things. So one, I just gave that quick example of this company called Brainbox that has invented this technology that does precisely what I said. So it's very little hardware has to go into a building. It's a AI cloud-based solution where Brainbox knows the angle of the sun, hitting a building, the wind speed. It has all this AI around the weather. It knows let's call it the carbon intensity of the grid at any given moment, how much solar renewables are on the grid versus fossil fuels. It knows the price at any given moment of energy. And so it can say, okay, look, we know with 96% certainty, because based on our models of, let's take an office floor, we know with 96% certainty who's going to be on this floor and where 6 hours from now. So we can gradually heat or cool that space. We don't have to spike the temperature at the last moment, which is what most buildings do. And by doing that, with all these other variables, we can save up to 25% on heating and cooling costs, up to 40% cuts in carbon emissions, and everyone's going to be a lot more comfortable in that space. So we were talking about that company. I had someone from a major commercial development real estate company in New York call me up. I was like, oh my God, I had no idea that exists. I had no idea that our competitors were doing it, and that type of technology is actually de-risked. I'm going to tell my CEO. And so that's our theory of change, right? Our theory of change is precisely that. We want to show you what's real, what your competitors are doing, what is de-risked, and what will improve your business. And that's really the key. What is going to improve your business? And almost bonus, cut carbon too, right? And that's really the framing. I'll give you another example. If you go on Patagonia.com and, tons of other e-commerce sites, but Patagonia is a really great example. Patagonia in and of itself is already known as like a poster child for environmental clothing, an incredible mission and all that stuff. If you go shop for a fleece right now, you'll see the fleece, the new fleece with all the pictures, and then you'll see a box that says, buy used. Right. And buy used is like, do you want it, worn again? So customers can send their older merchandise back, probably get a credit. That's actually a wonderful business for Patagonia, because the research shows that when people are buying used, it generates a lot more brand loyalty. The cost to actually put a new product on the site is really low, because this is right. It's already been made. You're just giving someone a credit. So the customer acquisition costs are low. The margins are high. The lifetime value of those customers are strong. The company behind that solution that actually puts it there is called Trove. Trove CEO comes from Nordstrom Rack, right? Trove CEO is not like a granola eating, crunchy dude living in Santa Cruz. He might live in Santa Cruz. He was friends with the two guys, the missionary, who are also great business guys, Andy Rubin, and what was the guy's other name? Blake, that's the first name, Warbach. Andy Rubin was the chief sustainability officer at Walmart, and the other one was I think the youngest executive director at one point of Sierra Club. Right. So it's not like they were dummies, and they're like really, really bright businessmen. But the guy to scale it was the Nordstrom Rack guy. And when he came in, because we had him on Supercool, and he was telling me, he's like, when I came in to take Trove to the next level, he's like, I said to the team, he's like, it was basically like, he's like, Josh, you know how the first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club? I'm like, yeah, I love that movie. And he's like, okay, well, the first rule about Trove is that we don't talk about climate. Right. We talk about everything I just said to you: lifetime value, customer acquisition, strong margins. Because once Carhartt or, Michael Kors or, Steve Madden or whatever, once they have it on their site and all that business benefit is accruing, everybody talks about climate, everybody talks about circular economy, everybody talks about sustainability, and everybody celebrates it, but it's got to work for the business first. And so we just do that over and over again. We go out and find the companies that are winning through that understanding of how you sell into market to get your climate solutions.
Really interesting model, and love the way it's kind of come to fruition. It's very, very cool. Josh, when it comes to one person that stands out for you, is there any one individual that's been either a leader in your life or just a model that you've followed as you've kind of grown this journey of yours?
Well, if I reflect back really honestly on it, I think even when I started that first company, Vivavi, my sustainable furniture and furnishings company, I was bootstrapping that business. So and it was a retailer. I wasn't going to be able to really raise a lot of capital. Plus it was so early and nobody even really knew what I was talking about. I barely knew what I was talking about, right? Like, we're selling this green modern stuff, right? But in my mental model was Richard Branson as a way of like business building, right? Richard Branson, like, I will jump out of a plane if it can help, if I can shine a spotlight on me and then reflect that spotlight or redirect that spotlight back to my companies, right? Like, and so it was never fully formulated for me, but when the opportunity came to write a blog that then became a radio show, I was going to jump on those opportunities because I knew that was how I could also redirect the spotlight from me to the ventures that I was working on. And so it's been a through line for me really thinking about, so Richard Branson comes to mind really as someone that had a huge influence on how I thought about building businesses in a really new space around sustainability and climate, and trying to draw attention in where there's also a lot of education that's going to need to happen. And so, very nice. Yeah, that's what springs to mind.
So what about on the other side? So Branson's, of course, an amazing example of just, oh, did you really?
I actually met him once. Yeah, it was really weird. It was on the line to a restroom in New York City. And I was standing with a guy who was like a biz dev guy, just a talker, my friend Fred, and he was like, "Oh, Richard, hey, it's Fred, remember?" And I'm like, "Oh, jeez, it's like Rich," And he was, for whatever reason, he was like looking at me. He's like, "What do you do?" And I'm like, "I run this company, Vivavi." And he's like, "What do you guys do?" I'm like, "Oh, we sell eco-friendly, modern design furniture." I'm like, "How's it going?" I'm like, "Well, some days are good, some days are bad." He's like, "Yeah, that sounds right. Keep it up." And I was like,
"That's great.
Thank you."
Very nice. Yeah. Line to the restroom. That's the classic spot. So what do you see in leaders the opposite of Richard? Like when it comes to like those that fail, anything come to mind that where they have not been able to progress their mission because they just don't get the messaging right, or they're just not great with people, or anything that has been a common thing you've seen?
Well, I think where companies struggle, let's say, to gain traction, and I think it does come certainly with young companies from startups top down from the founder. I've seen a few things, and I think it's particularly pronounced with climate technologies, is founders often, tech founders can often think that their company is the product. Right? Oh, what's your company? Oh, my company is this battery. My company is this solar panel, whatever, right? And therefore when they're going out to sell the product, that's a problem when you're selling to investors, because investors are like, I'm not investing in your battery, right? I'm investing in the team and the market and everything around that, including the battery. And when you're going out to customers, this has been a challenge, I think, with many climate technology companies, is that, if you're going to try and if you're a solar installer, right? Like, and you're trying to put solar panels on people's homes, and you're going out to talk to them about a 5 kilowatt hour system or whatever, and nobody wants to buy kilowatts, right? They want to buy lower energy bills. They want to buy peace of mind when there's an energy outage, right? When the power goes out, they want to know that they're going to keep their family safe. And I see companies struggle because they never realize that selling technology will only get you so far with a very limited audience. But if you really want to reach a broader, more mainstream audience, you have to start to evolve toward talking about product benefits. And then the other thing I see with particularly climate sustainability founders, which is understandable, they are so mission based, right? This is why I'm starting this company, because I'm trying to do this. And so then that's important. But if you're leading with your mission and you're trying to get people to buy climate, that too is a very small group of people that's going to buy climate. So that's where I see the founders tend to fail. Either they're talking too much about their technology, or they're talking too much about their mission, and they lose sight of the fact that really what they need to be talking about is how did they deliver benefits to customers, solve customer pain, and what are the outcomes that customers are actually looking for? How do you meet them there? And really build their company around that, just like any other business. All the other, climate, sustainability, positive impact, it's important. It can open a door, but it never closes a deal, especially when you're trying to scale. That's where I see
How about
founders
one thing
fail.
you've changed your mind on over the years?
Gosh, I change my mind on things all the time. I actually think that's probably one of my greater strengths is I'm willing to to come off my position. I would say that one thing that I've changed my mind about recently is my management style, where I have felt, because it's like how I like to be managed, is I was going to give people lots and lots of autonomy. Try to set the right direction, try to be available to reach that direction. What I've found is that that's helpful, but it's also really because I personally don't like getting bogged down in the detail, but that doesn't make me an effective manager. And I've come to realize and change my mind and realize that I actually have to learn some new skills, not as necessarily as the leader, but as the manager, and they do go hand in hand, to be more effective with my teams, with my organizations. I was operating under a model of personal model of leadership management for a very long time, and I had to change my mind and realize that I actually had to evolve it to be more effective. And I did that over the last couple of years.
That's a really important lesson, that just because you thought it was one way, 10, 15, 20 years ago, doesn't mean you have to do things the same way. Like letting go of whatever was in your mind as the right way in your head, right? That's a common thing, that whatever that means in management, leadership styles, but also in other ways in life, it's like, sometimes you got to let things go, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And, there's a theory of, just play to your strengths, don't worry about your, and it's like, well, I guess, I know that has a place, but I think that, I have found that working on some of my weaknesses makes me more effective than I was.
Some of it's acknowledging
before.
what those are, having that self-awareness, right? So you can play to those strengths, but also know where to stay out of it if it's not your strength, right? What have we missed that we should have talked about? Anything that you'd like to cover more?
Well, I mean, this has been great. The one thing I would say is that, another example of a super cool type business is I recently came back to a company I'd co-founded called Planted, which I started 5 years ago. I was started as the founding CEO, started with 2 engineers from SpaceX. We came up with this wild idea that we could potentially identify something that grows up to 10 times faster than trees. Trees pull carbon from the atmosphere right through photosynthesis as they grow. And if we could do that, and we could figure out how to actually stand up a new ag supply chain, then we could have this like 21st century climate crop that's solving climate change by rapidly removing carbon from the atmosphere. It's not like carbon is a problem. Carbon is only a problem because it's in the wrong place. Like we've burned it, and so now it's in the atmosphere, right? So if we can pull it out of the atmosphere, it's almost like there's this massive free resource up there. You have to figure out how to go get it efficiently. So we were like, well, if we can efficiently grow this biomass, we found this perennial grass that does grow like almost 10 times faster than trees. You can harvest it every year, sometimes up to 2 times a year. So we figured out how to grow that, and we realized that the biomass itself is really strong, so it can actually replace timber starting in home building. And so with the SpaceX team, we've built a factory that basically takes a mill, which would be like $300 or $400 million, has a bunch of smokestacks on it, like size of a small town, to take trees and turn them into plywood or oriented strand board, the panels you build houses with. We modularized that, shrunk it down to about 140 feet long. You plug it in, and we take our grass, we slice it really thin, invented all these machines, invented a new production press and technology. And out the other side comes a 4-foot by 8-foot panel that you nail to the 2x4s when you build a house. It's structural, but ours is made of grass. And now 5 years later, we're working with D.R. Horton, the largest home builder in the country, who's placed an order for 10 million of these panels. And we're rethinking really at this sort of what we would think the ambitious civilizational scale of how do you keep trees in the ground, how do you pull carbon from the atmosphere, how do you then lock that carbon away in new homes in the walls? Because when you pull down all that carbon, the way that we think about it is like, we pull all this carbon from the atmosphere, 70% of it is retained in the panels that leave our factory, just because our process is so efficient, far more than anything else that's on the market. And now we're building this business. So I just came back as CMO for this next growth stage, because we're about to go from this single panel and single product to become this whole platform for all sorts of carbon-based products that are made from carbon in the atmosphere, to serve different industrial needs. So it's that's another thing we're working on.
Well, welcome back
I'm
at
very
it
excited
at
about.
Planted. Congratulations. That sounds like quite a venture in itself. So before we wrap, like what do you want those you've worked with to say about your impact on them?
What would be very heartening to me, and is if people feel that they were both inspired by me and perhaps more so inspired to do their best work.
Very cool. And then how can listeners keep track of you, learn about your mission with Supercool and Planted?
The best place to find us is really anywhere you're listening to podcasts or newsletters. You could look us up, but getsuper.cool is our home base. So you can find everything we're doing there: courses, new products we're launching, podcast, newsletter. Planted, PLANTD. It's like a hipster spelling of the company. So plantedmaterials.com.
Very
you
cool.
can see more what we're doing
Josh
there.
Dorfman, Supercool and Planted. Thank you for being here. We appreciate you sharing. Take care.
Thank you, Graham.
Thanks.
Great to be with you.